No, I
So,
wanted to talk
yeah,
a little bit about what you were saying about, what would happen if everybody just turned off the 5G and all the cars stopped
yeah.
in this future that you're talking about. Well, did you know that the US ballistic missile systems have no antivirus, no data encryption, and it's just terrible. I'll go down the list for you, but
Hmm.
okay, number one, have you ever logged into Google and then it asks you, okay, pull out your phone and receive this text message? That's called
Yes,
multifactor authentication, and
right.
that's really important because if you, for some reason, have the password to get in, it still wants to make sure it's you because people can find ways to hack your password. So
Absolutely.
multi-factor authentication is a great way to keep your things safe. Well, the Department of Defense found that the majority of these missile silos did not have multi-factor authentication. So if you had the password, you wouldn't have to use another device to confirm it.
Oh my
Number
goodness. Yeah.
number
So
two,
you can hack these missiles. Okay.
yeah.
No, it's me,
Pat,
I promise.
the patches weren't applied consistently.
Uh-huh.
So, some of these missiles could be running on Windows 95 or Windows 3.1 or some
Yeah.
flavor of Unix that's just, ancient.
Yeah.
And people haven't been patching it. Now, do you remember a few years ago when all the routers had that issue where they needed to be patched? Well, a lot of these missile silos still have old network parameters that people know how to hack now, and that there's open windows for them to go through. And so these networks really should be patched, and that's unfortunate they aren't there. Um, one base didn't even patch systems for a flaw discovered in 1990. That's
Ooh.
18 years ago, more than 28 years ago.
Yeah.
Man, that's a long time. The server racks weren't locked. So if you somehow could get in there, you could easily access the server. And just like Mission Impossible, you could put your thumb drive in there and do all kinds of crazy things. Security cameras didn't cover the entire base. That means people could have found blackout spots to sneak in
Hmm.
and, get access to the missiles. The door sensors showed that doors were closed when they were actually opened, so the security system wasn't even working right for some of the bases. The personnel didn't even challenge visitors on the bases without proper badges. Now, I remember one time I was in Edmonton and I had to drop something off at a really fancy building, and I
Hmm.
just walked right in and someone just held the door open for me and didn't even ask for a pass.
Hey,
And then
welcome.
and then as soon as I dropped it off, someone was like, "Hey, I don't recognize you," but that
And you
seems a
ran
little,
away.
and I ran away. But that wouldn't have even happened in the missile silo because they just didn't ask.
Hmm.
One base didn't use antivirus software. Data stored on USB thumb drives were not encrypted, and IT didn't give a database about who had access to the system and why. So this brings up several good points. My first point is it better to leave it on legacy technology that isn't really connected to an internet, and you really would physically have to go to the base to launch the missile? And what about that legacy technology having all those holes that you can go
Hmm.
through back doors with that people could break into the base and change? Do you think it's worth upgrading all of that, or what do you think about that, Matt?
I don't know. I think it's a mixed bag. I think number one, you need your top security experts worrying about any missiles that are currently still in use and aren't decommissioned. That's pretty scary. There is something to be said for older technology, keeping it off the net. I think that's important. But on the other hand, you need to make sure all those holes are plugged. It sounds like they need a real security audit to go through and say, look, here's, well, or maybe they had that and that's what they're reporting on. So I think it's important to plug those holes before somebody that walks in with their
Plugs another
phone
hole
and
with
doot,
that.
doot, 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 doot. Yeah.
It just makes me worry though, because we've been talking about some spies, and we talked about that Russian spy that they
Yeah.
caught.
Oh yeah.
What if that person is the security auditor and it was fine before, and now that
Yeah.
it's going to connect to 5G and all these other fancy things, maybe they have access to it now, right?
Yeah.
So
I've
it's
got actually an interesting story to go with this.
oh, let's hear
So,
it.
my air conditioning wasn't working this summer, and in my car. I don't have it
Okay.
in my
I was
home.
like, you have air conditioning?
That would be awesome if I did, but for the 2 weeks of the year, I need it. But anyways, it wasn't working in my car, and it was really hot. It was 30 degrees Celsius, which is, probably not.
78. Yeah.
No, it's like 90. But anyways, it's
What?
hot still. Yeah, it's still hot. So I was like, man, it's really warm. And I found a really cheap mechanic. And it was all these Russian guys. I could hear them in the background. And so I start talking to this guy in Russian. And I said, so how long you been here? And what's your name? And he's telling me a story. And I said, why did you pick Edmonton? Like, of all the places you could have gone in the world, I mean, Edmonton, I love it. And I think a lot of people here do love it. But why would you say, I live in Russia, I'm going to go choose Edmonton? He goes, oh, that's an easy one. He said, I used to be in the Russian military, and I worked in the silo where the nuclear missile that was pointed at Edmonton was decommissioned.
Whoa.
So he said he was there when they decommissioned the missile, and he knew there were no more missiles pointed at Edmonton from Russia. So that's why he moved.
He did not pick it because of that.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Really?
Yeah.
I remember reading about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and our teacher told us that there were missiles pointed at our hometown of Edmonton back in the 60s. And so it's comforting to know that the person that was in charge of that,
Well, or at least the security guard that might ask you, hey, are you supposed to be here? That guy.
I think you're basically safe if you live in Edmonton, Saskatchewan, or Manitoba, right?
Well, Edmonton was the gateway for all the oil coming from the oil sands in the north. And so, of course, they had missiles pointed directly at Refinery Row. You shut down oil production, it's a big deal.
That's a good point.